This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. This week, I'm joined by author Robert Ashton to explore our increasingly distant relationship with the soil beneath our feet. Inspired by his new book, Down to Earth, Robert takes us on a journey through farming, mental health, education, conservation, and even spirituality, revealing why reconnecting with the land may be more important than ever. From care farms and forest schools to regenerative agriculture and the hidden stories buried in our soils, this is a conversation that invites us to look at the ground beneath us in a different way.
Yeah, my name is Robert Ashton. I live on the Suffolk coast where I grew up, but I went to agriculture college when I was young and spent some time selling fertiliser to farmers, married a farmer's daughter, became disillusioned with selling fertiliser, sold caravans for a while, then I had my own company for several years, and a few years ago I started writing books.
And what sort of books did you write? Was it all about your work?
Initially, because I was running a small business working with a marketing company, and so the first books were about starting a business, selling, marketing, copywriting, all the things I was learning to do for myself. I thought I'd write books to help other people do the same thing. And then I did the UEA's Creative Writing MA in 2019, which was a huge leap from an HND agriculture in 1978. I passed with distinction and started writing a book about rural Suffolk.
And that presumably is where you live?
Yeah, so I live near the Suffolk coast. I'm very close to Sizewell Sea. That's our nearest landmark now.
Well, that's funny. I was visiting Dungeness yesterday, so yeah, not dissimilar.
Half the people we meet in the town here now are wearing orange border suits and driving trucks with SZC on the back.
Yeah, they were all coming flooding out from work when I went past yesterday. It does make for a kind of dystopian but very interesting landscape, I have to say.
Yeah, there's lots going on. There's a new rail line going in, there's a new road going in, there's some new roundabouts on the main road, and there's lots of stuff going on in the 5-mile radius of the power station. And they're also starting to do some work on building the power station itself, so it's all quite exciting stuff.
Yeah, and to be honest, we kind of need to look at alternatives, don't we? So
yeah,
not all bad. So going back to the book that you have written recently, can you tell me about that? And it seems to be a follow-on to your previous work, and I wondered how you decided to sort of expand on that.
Yeah, the book I went to the UEA to write grew from a lifetime fascination with the writing of a Suffolk author called George Ewart Evans, who wrote a book called Ask the Fellows Who Cut the Hay in 1956. And he wrote about how life was in rural East Suffolk in the early years of the last century. And I was just fascinated by his work. I first read his books when I was 14, and I wanted to write a book that followed it. And so I started with grandchildren of those that he interviewed, then found other people bringing back traditional crafts but with a contemporary spin in East Anglia. And writing that book, I realised how much we lost our connection with the land and with the soil and with the earth. So kids think that food comes from Tesco's, not from the ground. So decided to write a book that just looked at our relationship with soil and how it's changed. And that's the book that comes out in July, that's Down to Earth.
The people that listen to this are generally gardeners, and so they will have their own kind of perspective on soil. But I like yours because it kind of zooms out a bit and looks at the bigger picture. So, one of the things that you talked about quite early on in the book, actually, was the idea of the earth being a closed system, which I've kind of come across before with somebody that I interviewed previously about a book. And it's just that idea that every atom on the planet is kind of recycled countless times. And that tied into the end where you talk about the method of basically disintegration of bodies through water and how that then gets released into the sort of water treatment system. And it's just that recycling element I find so fascinating.
And the only thing that's changed is there are more people now, of course, than there were in the past. So every atom is recycled. Everything we eat has been something else before. And the dissolving bodies in alkali, I found fascinating. The Guardian call it born in the bag.
Yeah.
Which I thought was classic. But again, if you get cremated, I mean, you're pumping out lots of CO2 to the atmosphere, so that your last kind of act on this planet is to pollute it. Whereas the resonation people, the alkaline hydrolysis people, that's much kinder to the environment. We have to look after the earth. We have to look after the soil that feeds us, because if we trash it, we're all doomed.
Absolutely. Yeah, and again, you move on early on in the book to talk about how we're most definitely becoming removed from the soil. And I was really interested about what you'd found out about children and how important it is for them to be in contact with the soil, which I think a lot of people, especially listeners, would understand. But I wondered if you could kind of talk about that a bit.
Yeah, so some of the older people I interviewed for the last book, the Where I Throws Who Cut the Hay, talked about how they used to play in the fields as children, and on 70, I used to play outside as a kid all the time. And now kids sit at home with a tablet computer and don't go outside. They don't touch dirt. They become sensitive to stuff. You get more allergies and things because people are not getting the stuff from the earth. And when I went to a forest school in the wood near Beccles in Suffolk, found out that just by letting kids that are disaffected in mainstream school, just letting them play outside in woodland, make mud pies, dig holes, climb trees, they suddenly become much more content. They sort of learn rather than ricocheting around a concrete classroom.
Yeah, and kind of learn in a much more natural way that encompasses nature.
Which is how it always was. I mean, a lot of your listeners, you say they're gardeners, and that's great. But I mean, most people now don't grow stuff in their garden. They don't even have a garden.
Well, yeah, access to land is a very important point, indeed. I mean,
Yeah.
is there a certain element of nostalgia to kind of look back and think, oh, you know, we did used to get our hands in the soil, we did used to do that? Or do you strongly believe actually that that's kind of where we maybe have diverged from the path that we should have been on and it's not had the best consequences?
Well, I think we always were connected with the soil in a very holistic way for thousands of years, and now we're remote from it. We have poorer mental health. We have more allergies, more health conditions. We're generally not very happy. Well, we're rediscovering, I think, that sense of community that everybody had 100 years ago that got kind of lost when people expected social services to solve everything. I have the sense of rediscovering the way it always was, but we kind of lost sight of in the last 100 years.
And, you know, adults as well, for them, it's important to be in contact with the soil. And quite often that
Yeah.
doesn't happen.
I read some interesting American stuff about, they call it grounding, and about touching the soil with your bare feet, and to be bare feet on the soil, on the grass, and just physically connect with it. And there's some stuff about ionization and that suggests it's a healthy thing to do anyway. But I mean, people always used to do that in the past, and then we didn't.
Yeah, and you talk as well about the sort of mental health aspect of it. And you mentioned a term that I'd not come across, despite the fact that it's probably in my field of work at the moment, but a care farm. What is a care farm?
So a care farm is really interesting. So a care farm is usually a small farm. It usually has animals. It is where people who are suffering from poor mental health or learning disability or something else that puts them on the outside of mainstream society, if you like, can just go and connect with the land and with each other and form those bonds again. I've met some really interesting people at care farms, and it's a growing movement. 50 years ago, my father-in-law, who was a farmer, used to have various boys around the farm that were helping out. They weren't really helping that much, but they were just getting close to the land, and it just made them happier.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for just getting out. But there's also that kind of, you know, I've discussed this before on the podcast, there's sometimes that fear that, and especially around soil, you know, there's issues of kind of cleanliness and hygiene and a fear of what might be lurking in it. Do you think that's just unfounded or you know, maybe a little bit perceived rather than a real problem?
Well, people talk about tetanus and other things from soil, but actually you've got to eat a lot of dirt before you catch anything nasty. And I just think that the soil has lots of microbes and bugs in that kind of help our digestion. So the old saying about eating a peck of dirt before you die, there's some truth in that. We just need to get close to it and not be afraid to get dirty.
Yeah. And you explore another aspect of connection with the earth, and there seem to be a few different strands. And I think two of the overriding ones were naturism and religion. And you kind of explored those by visiting people. What did you feel about that?
So I started off interviewing an Anglican clergyman and got talking about soil on the ground, and he talked about Celtic Christianity and how it was rooted in the natural world, whereas the Roman Church is all about dressing up and ringing bells and things. And that got me thinking, and I did a bit of research and found a network called the Christian Naturist Fellowship. Well, that's interesting. So that led me to contact them. And then one of the members said, well, yeah, I'd love to be interviewed. Why don't you come down to my club? So I drove to Colchester and we had a conversation, wearing nothing but a smile, sitting in some woodland at his naturist club. And again, it is about touching the soil and being connected with it. And he actually invited me to go back a few weeks later to speak at an interfaith event they held there. They had people from different religious denominations talking about their faith. And so I found myself stark naked in front of an audience of about 40 people talking about what it meant to me to be a Quaker.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a lot of strands all being brought together at once, I guess.
And there's another thing, I think, as a writer, when you write a book, you end up revealing a lot about yourself and putting a lot of yourself into the book, and it's quite, sometimes it's cathartic, or sometimes it's quite revealing and scary. And I realised that stripping in the interest of getting a good story is just part of the job, really.
It is, but did it genuinely make you feel more connected to the earth?
Well, I think so. So at the interfaith event I went to, there were about 40 or 50 of us, I guess. We sat in a clearing in this wood, and it was a really hot day, about 30 degrees, and there was bright sunshine, and there were loads of butterflies for some reason, lots of white butterflies. And it was quite spiritual, quite moving in all sorts of ways. I'd do it again. It was good.
Oh, well, that's good to know.
The other thing, of course, is that it encourages you to focus on eye contact when you're talking to somebody.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, that's a very good point, actually. And that's probably something we don't do so much nowadays. So it could be quite useful. And I mean, you also explored farming, which again was kind of something I think you looked into in your other book, and how, again, I was interested in how much we'd sort of removed ourselves from the soil in terms of mechanisation, you know, particularly in the farming context.
The farm is interesting. So I met one man that he had 1,000 acres, and he said you need 4,000 acres to justify having a combine harvester. So somewhere else has a combine, he has a baler. They're all massive machines, and they kind of work together. And yet, 50, 60 years ago, my father-in-law had 200 acres of combine harvester he mended every year with baling string and wire. And he kind of managed. I met a really fascinating man called Paul who grows thatching straw on 100 acres. And the farm had belonged to his father and before that his father's uncle. And they'd never taken the government grants to remove hedges. And so it still had the medieval field. His biggest field was 10 acres. And I went down there while he was harvesting his thatching straw. And the straw was as tall as I was, a really tall straw. He cut it with a reaper binder, which is how everybody harvested before the combine harvester. And it was like going back in time. And he makes a good living from growing thatching straw, which flies in the face of the guy that says you need thousands of acres, massive great big machines to make a living.
That is a good point. And I wonder, I don't think anyone's done a study. Well, then maybe they have, but not that I know of, whether they've studied, or even anecdotally, whether somebody who's farming in that much more naturalistic way, kind of in tune with the land, is actually getting more job satisfaction and more contentment out of doing that.
He was certainly happy after because he was doing what he'd always done. He's doing what his father had done. I say my father-in-law was a farmer, and we traced his farming family back to the 16th century. And so it was just natural he was going to farm. He was just happy being a farmer, but on a small scale. He made a good living and was happy.
I don't like to look back with rose-tinted glasses because I know things were, you know, very hard and a lot of things were done that we wouldn't necessarily agree with. But that said, we have as a species evolved incredibly quickly to kind of be removed from the land. And I'm not sure we have evolved quite as quickly in ourselves to kind of cope with that detachment.
And I don't think people have changed at all in thousands of years. Another place I went to researching this book was to Grimes Graves in Thetford, which are Neolithic flint mines in Norfolk. And at the bottom of the mine, I went down with an archaeologist down this 30-metre ladder into this pit where they mined flints, cutting it out of the chalk. The miners used antlers as picks, and when they're worn out, they chucked it to one side, as people do. And 10% of the discarded antlers were right antlers, and 90% were left antlers, because 90% of Neolithic people are right-handers, so it's just the same mix as it is today.
And I liked actually what you said about that, where, you know, you were slightly disappointed that they weren't carefully setting them aside, but they were sort of littering in the way that we might today.
Yeah. I went on the Sizewell C construction site. I went on there with some archaeologists who were doing some work pre-construction. And they were saying how when they go to digs, you find out where people just chuck stuff next to the house. They didn't recycle it, just chucked it away. And lots of Roman pottery got upcycled by later people. So human nature hasn't changed in thousands or millions of years. It's just the world we've created around ourselves has changed.
Yeah, it definitely has. And again, you talk about roads, which is a really important thing that so many people, I think, don't think about, that infrastructure installation and the effect that that has on soil. But I was actually, I think, fairly pleased maybe that when you went to visit the site of a new road, it actually didn't seem as destructive. I know it is, and and it's all the stuff that pops up around that road. But the actual construction of the road, I thought maybe seemed more sympathetic than I thought it would have been.
Yeah, and what struck me was the way they build the road now. So where in the past they'd have brought in hundreds of truckloads of aggregate to lay a road, stone and stuff. Now they just almost motivate the soil with cement and that sets. So they're not bringing in lots of stone and stuff to make a road. So literally mix cement with the topsoil and then put a surface on it. And the machines they use are all guided by GPS, and they move the soil around, so all the soil on the site stays on the site. So the high bits go to the low bits, and where they've got some spare, they make the bankments a little bit higher.
Yes. So they're cutting and filling with the stuff that might otherwise have got taken away.
Yeah. So it's quite different. And some of the plant they use is now electrically driven rather than diesel. So they start moving away from burning lots of oil as well. So we seem to be going back to how things are. I'm just struck by the fact that 100 years ago, we didn't use much oil or gas. We didn't have central heating. We didn't travel a lot. And we had this big blip about 50 years from the 1950s probably to 2050 where we go crazy using lots of oil. And now we're starting to go back to how it was before. So people talk about regenerative farming, which is no more than farming without fertilizer and using rotation and livestock, as it always was until people invented ammonium nitrate in the 60s and started pumping continuous wheat in high yields.
Yeah, and you also talk about peatlands, which, again, is a problem in the UK for sure. But do you see a kind of slowing up of that as well?
I think so. I think we're more aware of all those things now, and I just get the sense that we're going back. So I said a while ago about 1,000 acres isn't big enough to have a combine harvester, so you share with somebody else. But we're also starting to see self-driving tractors and robots on farms, so you can see the need to have massive fields disappearing. You could see some of the hedgerows coming back. And the 1,000-acre farmer I met, he'd planted beetle banks, which are like corridors of wildness between his crops to encourage wildlife. So we're sort of slowly but surely not turning the clock back to a nostalgic past, but we're kind of creating a future which has some of the good stuff from the past, but not the bad stuff from the past.
Yeah, definitely. And talking of the bad stuff from the past, you also write about the effect of war on soil. And again, that's something that I didn't even think about.
That's fascinating. I learned a new word, bombturbation.
Yeah. Can you explain that?
There's a whole swathe of France that you can't do anything with even now, 110 years after the First World War, because of the stuff they threw about.
Yeah, well, that's it, isn't it? And just the fact that there's so much that is underneath the soil that we don't even think about literally hitting whilst we're, gardening or working the land.
I also interviewed a chap that had been in the Army bomb disposal team in Iraq, and he talked about defusing IEDs, which made out of old pallets, apparently. And he talked about how the bombs in the Second World War, the German bombs would hit London, and when a bomb went into the ground, it would level out like an umbrella shape, so it could go into the ground and then be under a house, 20 or 30 yards away from where it hit the ground.
And yeah, the thing that I thought was really interesting was how trees react to unexploded bombs.
Yeah, because they like the nitrogen. They can attract the roots, clutch the bomb to try and get the nitrogen in the explosives.
Yeah, I loved what you said about them kind of clinging on to the bombs to kind of almost protect the people above the soil.
So even trees are brighter than we give them credit for.
Yeah, but again, you were talking about World War I and II mainly, and obviously Afghanistan. But then, if you think about today, still the damage that we're wreaking on land that could be used for food and amenity, and just not really even considering it. We're considering the human cost, we're considering the political stuff, but I really don't think people are thinking so much about the landscape. Terrifying. I mean, one of the things I thought when I was reading the book was it's almost as if we keep trying to remove ourselves from the soil. And I don't know if it's a conscious thing or it's just a progress thing, or if we are partly conscious of what we're doing, but we just seem to keep putting layers of stuff in between us and our contact with the soil. Have you found that?
I guess modern life encourages us to ignore soil, doesn't it? We live in a flat, maybe in a city, we walk to the shops, we walk to work. We don't really go outside at all. But I think we have to rediscover that. We just have to go back to just being outside and being calm.
It's so short-sighted as well, given how essential it is to our lives.
Yeah. And also I was struck by, we've always known that we're damaging the soil. There's a chap called Walter Shieldbug Cooper who wrote a book called The ABC of Soil. And he talked about how important it was to have earthworms and to have a healthy soil with worms in it. And no, we don't. We just kind of wreck it so that the worms aren't there. So Charles Darwin wrote a book about worms in the 19th century. So people have always looked at this stuff and written about it and talked about it, but people have tended to ignore it.
Yeah. I don't know why. Monetary gain, maybe, or just because it kind of inconveniently stands in the way of progress. I don't know. But yeah.
I think it's the short-termism of politics and the media, isn't it? Where we're encouraged to, by the media, buy this, buy that, have this experience, that experience. Politics is on a 4 or 5 year cycle, and they don't look beyond that. So,
yeah, that's a good point. So as a result of your research and writing the book, is there anything that you've kind of fundamentally changed the way that you do it?
So I'm sitting at my desk now, and we live on the edge of a town, and we have an acre of ground around our house, half of which is trees, established woodland. And in front of my window, I've established what I guess is wildflower meadows. So it's just all long, tall daisies, really pretty, waving in the wind. And just at the back of that, next to the fence, there's a badger set, and the badgers come out every night and run around and eat worms and do what badgers do, and it's just natural. So I don't grow things in my garden. I have grass and trees and wildflowers.
So keep it wild and, let things do what they want to do.
And if I'm feeling a bit stressed, as I often am, I'll often just go and stand outside, just to be outside in the trees. And it's really nice to stand in the trees on a hot, sunny day with the dappled light, just looking through the branches at what's around. And you suddenly think, well, actually, this is the world. I'm just part of a far bigger thing.
Thanks for listening, and thanks to Robert for such a thought-provoking conversation. If today's episode has got you thinking about soil, you might also enjoy episode 328, Soil Health and Nutrition, with Sam Hamrebtan, and episode 334, Food Farming Revolutionary, with Joshua Sparks of Birch Farm. You'll find links to both in the show notes, and as always, thank you for listening. Next up is Benny with his Insect of the Week.
The Shieldbug Stalker. Scientific name, Astata boops. Now things are really starting to ramp up. We've got a solitary wasp today, and the common name is a shieldbug stalker. This is an example where I think the common names come into their own and really good for getting people excited about insects. If you only hear the scientific name, I think the chances of you getting excited without being really into insects is quite low. The scientific community can frown upon common names because they can be confusing. There can be multiple common names for one species, and then there can be potential confusion. So this one, I think, is really good to get people excited. I love that it was created for this purpose, and it kind of describes what it does. So I'll start with the etymology. Astata comes from Greek, meaning unsteady or restless. I think that's to do with the nature of the insect when it's kind of flitting about, either checking out a location, waiting for a mate, or stalking its prey. So I have seen this behavior. It does make sense. The second word of the scientific name, boops, also comes from Greek, and that means ox-eyed or cow-eyed. And that relates to the male, which has these really big bulbous eyes that join in the middle on the top of its head. Really quite unique, exceptional eyesight. And so they've got these exceptionally large compound eyes that meet at the very top of the head. It's a red and black solitary wasp. Both the male and female are red and black. Really striking. The family is the estate today. And what they do, they prey on shield bugs. So true bugs of the Pentomidae family. And these are typically, from the ones that I know of, sap-sucking true bugs. So most shield bugs suck sap of plant tissue, whether it's trees or shrubs or herbaceous plants. I think some of them might eat seeds as well. But the ones that are in question here are sapsuckers. So you really do want some predators of sapsuckers because they can cause some issues when you're looking at food growing or agricultural crops. So you definitely want solitary wasps. They're the most important group, really, that keep a lot of these herbivorous insects in check. So if you've got insects sucking sap from plants, and that's great, but as long as you've got the layers of predators keeping them in check. Same for aphids. Aphids are brilliant at the bottom of the food chain, like plankton in the ocean, but you need all the layers of predators to be predicting on them. And so here we have a very good example of a solitary wasp in Asteta boaps that will keep shield bugs in check. Now, in the literature, it talks about, usually it's nymphs, so they're not the fully adult stage of shield bugs, but there is evidence on many occasions of them taking adults as well. So I've got a photograph which I'll share on Instagram, very cool photo from a friend who's a much better photographer than I, and she's got a shot of the shieldbug stalker with a shieldbug in tow, which I'll be sharing. So really cool. The process is that the female wasp will fly with the paralyzed prey to the nest burrow, where the shieldbug will be stored by the entrance until there's sufficient provision for the nest itself. Then the egg is laid on the first stored bug in each cell. And then that development takes place. The larvae in Korea in experiments developed in 3 days, but in the UK and Scandinavia, Europe, it might be a slightly different rate. In the UK and Scandinavia, where more the information is available on, the species is thought to overwinter in the pupal stage. So it'll have a reasonably short season of a couple of months. Then the larvae will develop, stay in the pupal stage over the winter, and then the following year it'll emerge again. So it's like an annual cycle for these species. The flowers visited, usually umbellifers like wild carrot, wild parsnip, fennel, that kind of stuff, for the nectar drinking in between. It's a southern UK species, usually the southeast, absent from Scotland, Wales and Ireland, but you never know where it's going to turn up. So, as always, please do take pictures and keep records of all the shield bugs you see, all the solitary wasps you see. Get the best photos you can, and then hopefully you get some of it ID'd. And do record on the iRecord and iNaturalist app. And please tag me in if you see this wasp. It's so fascinating and stunning.
You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All Podcast.